A few years back, as a 24-year-old juggling community college, I landed a gig at a local grocery store to earn some extra cash for daily expenses and outings with friends. Over time, I grew familiar with the regular customers, most of whom were friendly or just your average shoppers. However, one individual stood out, a man who consistently gave off an odd vibe. He'd show up almost every night around 9, just an hour before the store closed, and wander the aisles extensively before picking up just a couple of items and heading to the checkout. His nightly routine of lingering around for ages, only to leave with a handful of things, struck me as peculiar. Despite his reserved demeanor, his unkempt appearance suggested he might be living rough, perhaps homeless, couch surfing, or residing in his car. This pattern persisted for several weeks, if not months, and it became a routine part of my job. Then one night, he broke his usual routine. Instead of meandering through the store, he made a beeline for the register where I was stationed. I offered my assistance, and to my surprise, he stared at me for a moment before inquiring about the old Toyota parked in the lot. His directness caught me off guard, as I couldn't fathom how he knew about my car. I cautiously confirmed it was mine, expecting some car trouble inquiry. But the man maintained his serious expression and simply walked away from the register, leaving me puzzled. The encounter had left me rattled, so I asked a colleague to cover the registers momentarily while I checked the front of the store. My car sat where I'd parked it, seemingly unaffected. Returning to the register, I anticipated the man's checkout to address his inquiry, but he never showed up. Closing time arrived, and he hadn't made his usual stop at the register, a stark deviation from his routine. Leaving the store that night, I inspected my car thoroughly, finding nothing amiss. I was perplexed. The following day and for the subsequent month, the man was nowhere to be seen. His absence fueled my curiosity. Why had he asked about my car with no apparent reason? The unanswered query lingered, compounded by his sudden disappearance. Then, one Saturday night, after my usual shift ended, a peculiar sensation gnawed at me as I strolled through the parking lot. It might have been a trick of memory or perhaps a gut feeling, but an inexplicable unease crept in. Something felt off, triggering an instinctual discomfort. I hurried into my car, scanning the almost empty lot for any signs of trouble. As I started the engine and prepared to drive, a faint sound from directly behind me caught my attention. Before I could react, a movement in the rearview mirror suggested something was amiss in the back seat. I bolted out of the car, leaving it running, and positioned myself a few spaces away, watching as a figure shifted in the back seat through the window. I sprinted back into the store, dialing the police. By the time they arrived, my car was vacant and there were no signs of forced entry. It dawned on me that they might have had an illicit copy of my keys, or perhaps I had inadvertently left the doors unlocked. The unsettling thought lingered. Could this have been the same peculiar man from weeks ago? It seemed like he might have been attempting to break in during the entire month I hadn't seen him, waiting for that one slip-up when I forgot to lock the doors. While I was quite sure I'd locked them that night, occasional forgetfulness lingered in the back of my mind. It was chilling to realize the person lurking in my car wasn't merely after a robbery. Their intent seemed more sinister. They stayed hidden, even after I started the car. The thought that I was moments away from driving off, unaware of their presence, was horrifying. I shudder to think of what could have unfolded had I driven away. Would they have waited until I reached home? Or worse, who knows what could have happened en route? I run a cleaning business for big office buildings, and our work starts at 6 p.m. because most offices prefer cleaning after their staff leaves. One evening, I arrived at a 2-story building at 6:30 p.m., punched in the code, and got my gear inside, making sure to lock up. The building was smaller but had long floors and a small basement. I began on the second floor, picking up trash and clearing the floors. Then, I took the bags out to the dumpsters at the back. Out there, I spotted 2 cars parked. It was odd because this office was the only nearby place and nobody was supposed to be around. I wondered why they were parked at the back and where the people might be. After double-checking the doors, I went back to work. Every now and then, I peeked out the windows, but the cars stayed put. When I went down to the first floor, I saw a light come on in one of the cars as I tossed the trash. But as soon as I stepped outside, it switched off. It made me nervous, so I hurried back indoors. Realizing someone was inside one of the cars made things even stranger. I hurried to finish the floor by 11 p.m., much quicker than usual. All that was left was the small basement level. As I moved my equipment downstairs and began working, I noticed it was mostly used as a storage warehouse filled with boxes. While I was down there, a loud thud reverberated through the building, originating from one of the floors above. I paused, trying to figure out the source, when I heard voices coming down the upper hallway. Two men were chatting casually, not concerned about being discovered. I retreated, dialing 911. But before I could speak, footsteps echoed down to the basement. I hid behind the boxes, catching only the shadow of the man against the wall. He roamed briefly before calling upstairs, claiming they were in the clear. As he ascended, I glimpsed something small in his hand, sending a shiver down my spine. I reconnected with 911 and relayed what little I could, waiting anxiously. The men seemed to move around the building, initially staying on the top floor, then suddenly rushing back to the first floor. Panic set in as they realized their van was still parked. They scurried around, searching for me, creating chaos above me. Soon, heavy footsteps thundered down the basement stairs, and one of them started tossing boxes, scouring every corner. The distant wail of approaching sirens caught the attention of one of the intruders, prompting both men to flee. I remained hidden until an officer arrived, which didn't take long. Within just 2 hours, the suspects were apprehended. They chose not to disclose their motives for breaking in, but stolen items were recovered from their cars. Their lack of foresight was evident. They seemed to gamble on my absence rather than checking for my van first. Despite discovering I was inside, their decision to stay put was the most frightening aspect. I shudder to think what might have unfolded if they had found me. Thankfully, I was spared from that terrifying possibility. Throughout my nearly decade-long tenure as a county police officer, I've encountered my fair share of unsettling situations, leading me to question my chosen career path. However, one particular night remains vivid in my memory, the event that I often find myself dwelling on. It was the tail end of winter, and in my area the cold lingered until mid-spring. On this night, my shift primarily involved patrolling the major highway. Typically uneventful, most nights would involve stopping a few speeders, with little else occurring apart from occasional backup calls. Around 2 a.m., while making my customary rounds along the highway, I passed a car parked on the roadside that hadn't been there before. Its lights were off, tucked far onto the shoulder, catching my eye only as I was driving past. I took the next exit, completing a full circle that took about 15 minutes before returning to the spot where I'd spotted the vehicle. I assumed it might have been an abandoned or broken-down car that had eluded my notice earlier, so I wasn't in a hurry. Parking approximately 15 feet behind it, I left my headlights on and radioed in, reporting my investigation of an apparently deserted vehicle on the southbound highway. Armed with my flashlight, I cautiously approached the car. The car struck me with its antiquity, looking like a relic from the 90s, coated in rust, dented and scratched. Approaching the driver's side window with my flashlight, I found the car empty. As I scanned around, alarm bells rang when I noticed something unsettling: a jumbled pile of clothes strewn across the back seat, appearing to belong to a young woman. Yet their disarray felt off, not how you'd expect them to be. Moving to the other side of the vehicle, a faint noise behind me grabbed my attention. Swiftly turning, I aimed my flashlight into the woods bordering the highway, causing the sound to cease instantly. But I had heard footsteps. Someone was out there, possibly observing me. I shouted, demanding the figure step into the light with hands raised. No response. My heart raced as I updated the situation over the radio, requesting backup. Standing there, staring into the dense woods, fear gnawed at me. If something sinister had occurred here, whoever lurked in the shadows might try to prevent me from uncovering it. With heightened caution, I raised my firearm, maneuvering cautiously behind the car, ensuring cover while keeping a vigilant eye on the tree line without fully exposing myself. The following 5 minutes felt excruciatingly tense until another officer arrived at the scene. In an instant, I heard hurried footsteps darting deeper into the woods. We swiftly combed through the vehicle, confirming our suspicions that something serious had occurred. However, venturing into the woods at night, with a potentially dangerous individual lurking, wasn't a viable or safe option. Among the troubling signs was an empty ammunition package, hinting that the person might be armed. The awareness that someone had been observing me, possibly even targeting me with a weapon, haunted my thoughts. It's a chilling sensation, even in hindsight. The next day, with more information at hand, we conducted a more extensive investigation. Unfortunately, the car couldn't be traced, and although we found shoe prints in the woods, they vanished swiftly, offering no clear direction. The truth about that night remains an enigma, an unsolved case with no leads on potential suspects or victims. It's a mystery that refuses to fade from my mind, leaving me grappling with unanswered questions. I remember that night vividly, the night that changed everything. I was just a young girl, barely 19, and working the night shift at Walmart. Most people would think it's just a mundane job. But that night, it turned into a nightmare that still haunts me. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard it, a faint sound echoing from the back of the store. At first I brushed it off as just the settling of the building, but then it started again, a soft shuffle of footsteps. I should have known something was off, but I continued stocking the shelves, trying to ignore the creeping unease crawling up my spine. Then the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows down the aisles. My heart pounded as I moved cautiously, feeling like I wasn't alone. Every sound, every creak made my skin crawl. That's when I noticed the toys section, quiet and still, except for the faint jingle of a music box. The thing was, we didn't sell music boxes. I approached it hesitantly, the tune growing louder with each step. My hands trembled as I reached for one of the boxes, and as I touched it, the music abruptly stopped. Silence engulfed the aisle, so thick it felt suffocating. That's when I heard the whispering, faint at first, then growing stronger. It was a chorus of voices, distorted and chilling. My heart raced, and I wanted to run, but my feet were frozen to the spot. Suddenly, the shelves began to shake violently, toys tumbling down in a chaotic mess. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw her, a little girl, pale and translucent, standing among the fallen toys. Her hollow eyes pierced through me as she reached out a hand, her voice a chilling echo in the empty store. "Help me find my doll, Casey." I wanted to scream, to flee, but I was paralyzed with fear. The little girl's voice grew more desperate, more haunting. The lights flickered wildly as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling around me. Then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, it stopped. The lights stabilized, the toys lay still, and the girl was gone. I stumbled out of the aisle, my breath ragged and panicked. I quit that job the next day, unable to shake off the terror that had gripped me that night. But even now, I can't forget the chilling whispers or the ghostly figure of that little girl searching for her doll in the dead of night. And I can't shake the feeling that something followed me home from that Walmart, something that lingers in the shadows, waiting.